Hello and welcome to Do, where every story feels like a conversation over a warm cup of coffee. I am Dr. John H. Watson, chronicler of the remarkable Sherlock Holmes, and tonight I invite you to join us in the gaslit glow of 221B Baker Street, where a tale of snow and shadow awaits. Chapter 1. The Distressed Visitor. It was a bitter December evening in the year 1888. And the city of London lay beneath a mantle of snow that softened the harsh edges of its bustling streets. The fog, ever a faithful companion to the metropolis, pressed against the windows of our lodgings at 221B Baker Street, lending an ethereal glow to the gas lamps that flickered outside. Within, the warmth of a crackling fire cast dancing shadows upon the walls, and the familiar clutter of Sherlock Holmes's quarters, chemical apparatus, scattered newspapers, and the ever-present violin seemed to hum with quiet anticipation. Holmes himself lounged in his armchair, his long fingers steepled beneath his chin, his gray eyes fixed upon some distant thought. The violin lay idle across his lap, a rare occurrence, for music was often his refuge when the world offered no puzzle worthy of his intellect. I, seated opposite with a medical journal, found my attention wandering to the storm outside. The wind howled, carrying with it the muffled clatter of hansom cabs and the occasional shout of a street vendor braving the cold. "Watson," Holmes remarked suddenly, his voice cutting through the silence, "you are distracted. The journal holds no interest for you tonight, I perceive." I smiled, accustomed to his uncanny observations. "The weather, Holmes. It makes one restless, and you, I wager, are bored." He raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk playing upon his lips. "Boredom is the curse of an idle mind, my dear Watson, but fear not. London is never long without its intrigues. Mark my words, before this night is out, we shall have a visitor." No sooner had he spoken than a sharp rap echoed from the street door below. I glanced at Holmes, who leaned forward, his expression alight with the predatory gleam that heralded a new challenge. Mrs. Hudson's footsteps ascended the stairs, followed by a lighter tread, and presently our landlady appeared, her face flushed from the cold. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said. "There's a young lady to see you, a Miss Eleanor Vance. She's in a dreadful state, poor thing, and insists it's urgent." "Show her in, Mrs. Hudson," Holmes replied, rising with the grace of a panther. "And pray bring tea. Our guest will need warming." Mrs. Hudson nodded and retreated, and moments later, the door opened to admit a figure that seemed to step from the very fog itself. Miss Eleanor Vance was a woman of perhaps 25, tall and slender, with features that might have been called handsome were they not marred by evident distress. Her dark hair was pinned beneath a snow-dusted bonnet, and her cloak, though of fine wool, was sodden at the hem. Her eyes, wide and hazel, darted about the room before settling upon Holmes with a mixture of hope and desperation. "Mr. Sherlock Holmes?" she inquired, her voice trembling yet refined, betraying a cultured upbringing. "At your service, madam," Holmes replied, gesturing to a chair by the fire. "And this is my colleague, Dr. Watson. Pray be seated and tell us what brings you to Baker Street on so inhospitable a night." Miss Vance hesitated, clutching a small reticule as though it were a lifeline. She sank into the chair, her gloved hands trembling as she removed her bonnet, revealing a face pale as the snow outside. I noted the faint lines of strain about her mouth and the rapid pulse at her throat. A physician's habit, perhaps, but one that spoke volumes of her agitation. "Mr. Holmes," she began, her voice low but steadying, "I am in dire need of your assistance. A terrible tragedy has befallen my family, and I fear it is but the prelude to greater horrors. My brother, Mr. Edward Vance, was found dead 3 days ago, murdered in the snow near Cheapside. And he is not the only one. 2 other men, strangers to me, have met similar fates in the past week, each discovered with a peculiar symbol carved in the snow beside them. The police are at a loss, And I—" Her voice broke and she pressed a hand to her lips. "I fear I may be next." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing with that intensity which I knew presaged a mind fully engaged. "A symbol, you say? Describe it, if you please, with utmost precision." Miss Vance nodded, her fingers tracing an invisible pattern in the air. "It is a spiral, sir, tightly coiled, perhaps 6 inches in diameter. The lines are deep and deliberate, as though etched with care. I saw it myself beside Edward's body, and the police confirmed its presence at the other scenes." "Intriguing," Holmes murmured, his gaze distant. "And your brother? What was his profession?" "He was a chemist employed by a firm in the city. His work involved the development of new compounds, though he spoke little of it. He was a private man, devoted to his studies." "And these other victims?" Holmes pressed. "You say they were strangers, yet you believe their deaths are connected?" "Yes," she replied, her voice gaining strength. "The police mentioned their names, a Mr. Thomas Harrow, a merchant, and a Mr. Charles Drayton, a banker. I know of no link between them and Edward, save this dreadful symbol. But I received a letter yesterday, anonymous, warning me to flee London or share their fate." She produced a folded paper from her reticule and handed it to Holmes. He unfolded it with care, his eyes scanning the contents. "Common stationery posted from Whitechapel. The hand is disguised but educated. Leave London, Miss Vance, or the snow shall claim you." Crude yet effective. He passed the letter to me, and I noted the angular script written in black ink with a slight tremor. "Miss Vance," I said gently, "have you any enemies, or perhaps your brother? Some grudge that might explain this?" She shook her head, her eyes filling with tears. "None that I know of, Dr. Watson. Edward was reserved but kind. I cannot fathom who would wish him harm, let alone these others. But the letter, it came to my lodgings in Kensington, and I have told no one of my movements. Someone is watching me." Holmes rose and paced before the fire, his silhouette sharp against the glow. "A pattern emerges, Watson. 3 murders in 7 days, each marked by a spiral, and now a threat to our client. The snow is not merely a backdrop, but a canvas for the killer's signature. Tell me, Miss Vance, did your brother ever mention an interest in alchemy or esoteric societies?" Miss Vance blinked, startled. "Alchemy? No, sir. His work was scientific, not fanciful. Though—" She hesitated, frowning. "Some months ago he spoke of a colleague who dabbled in strange experiments, but he dismissed it as folly." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A thread, however slender. We shall pursue it. Miss Vance, you will remain under our protection. Watson, tomorrow we shall visit the scene of your brother's death and consult with Inspector Lestrade. The game, as they say, is afoot." Mrs. Hudson entered with a tray of tea, and I poured a cup for our guest, who accepted it with a grateful nod. As she sipped, the color began to return to her cheeks, though her eyes remained haunted. I could not help but feel a pang of sympathy for the young woman, thrust into a maelstrom of fear and loss. "Mr. Holmes," she said presently, "I have heard of your methods. Do you truly believe you can unravel this horror?" Holmes smiled, a rare warmth softening his features. "Madam, I have yet to meet a mystery that does not yield to reason. Rest assured we shall find your brother's killer, and I suspect a great deal more besides." As the clock struck 9, Miss Vance rose to depart, promising to return the following day. Holmes escorted her to the door where a hansom cab waited, its driver muffled against the cold. The snow continued to fall, blanketing Baker Street in silence, and I watched her vanish into the fog, a solitary figure in a city of secrets. "Watson," Holmes said, returning to his chair, "what do you make of our visitor?" "A brave woman, but terrified," I replied. "The spiral intrigues me. It suggests a ritual, perhaps, or a personal vendetta." "Precisely. Holmes said, lighting his pipe. The spiral is no mere flourish. It is a message, and we shall decipher it. But first, sleep. Tomorrow we hunt. I retired to my room, the wind's mournful howl echoing in my ears. As I drifted into uneasy slumber, I could not shake the image of that spiral carved in the snow, a silent herald of death. Chapter 2. The First Clue. The morning following Miss Eleanor Vance's visit dawned cold and gray, with snow still falling upon London's labyrinthine streets. At 221B Baker Street, the fire burned low, and Sherlock Holmes was already astir, his lean frame cloaked in a greatcoat as he prepared for our expedition. His eyes, sharp as a hawk's, betrayed the restless energy that a new case always kindled within him. "Watson," he called, adjusting his deerstalker. "We must not keep Inspector Lestrade waiting. The scene of Mr. Edward Vance's murder awaits, and with it, I trust, the first thread of our mystery." I donned my coat, my medical bag in hand, and followed Holmes into the frosty air. A hansom cab, its wheels crunching through the snow, carried us toward Cheapside, where the Thames's murky waters whispered beneath a veil of fog. The city was a study in contrasts. Gas lamps glowed faintly against the gloom, while street vendors hawked their wares with cheerful defiance of the cold. Yet an undercurrent of unease lingered, as though London itself sensed the shadow of the snow killer. We alighted in a narrow alley, its cobbles buried beneath a pristine blanket of snow. Inspector Lestrade, his coat collar turned up against the wind, greeted us with his customary blend of respect and skepticism. A small knot of constables stood guard, their breath clouding in the chill air. "Holmes," Lestrade said, his voice gruff, "I hope you're not wasting my time. 3 murders, all with that blasted spiral, and not a scrap of sense to be made of it. The press is howling, and the commissioner's on my back." Holmes's lips twitched in a faint smile. "Patience, Lestrade. The snow may yet speak if we listen. Show us the scene." Lestrade led us to a spot where the alley widened, near a shuttered warehouse. There, preserved by the cold, lay the outline of Edward Vance's body, though the corpse itself had been removed. Beside it, etched with uncanny precision in the snow, was the spiral Miss Vance had described. A tightly coiled pattern, its lines deep and deliberate, as though carved with a steady hand. I knelt beside it, marveling at its clarity despite the falling snow. "Remarkable," I murmured. "It's untouched, as if the killer lingered to perfect it." Holmes crouched beside me, his magnifying glass glinting under the dim light of a nearby gas lamp. "Not lingered, Watson, but planned. Observe the depth of the lines, consistent, suggesting a tool, perhaps a cane or a blade's edge. The spiral is not an afterthought, but the killer's signature." He traced the pattern with a gloved finger, his brow furrowed. "And yet the snow around it is undisturbed, save for a single anomaly." He pointed to a faint impression half buried by fresh snow some yards from the spiral. It was a footprint, irregular and shallow, as though its maker had limped or dragged one leg. Holmes studied it intently, noting the size and tread. A man's boot, size 10, worn unevenly on the right heel. Our killer, or a witness. Either way, a clue, Lestrade snorted. "A footprint in a city of millions? You'll need more than that, Holmes." Holmes rose, brushing snow from his coat. "One clue, Lestrade, is worth 1,000 theories. Tell me, what do we know of the victim?" Lestrade consulted his notebook. "Edward Vance, 32, chemist. Found 3 nights ago, dead from a single stab wound to the heart. No signs of struggle, no robbery. The other victims, Harrow and Drayton. Same method, same spiral. All within a mile of here." Holmes's eyes narrowed. "A chemist, a merchant, a banker. No obvious connection, yet the spiral binds them. Watson, what do you make of the wound?" As a physician, I considered the details. A single stab, precise and fatal, suggests skill, perhaps medical or military training. The lack of struggle implies surprise or trust. The killer knew his victim, or at least his habits. "Excellent, Watson," Holmes said, his tone approving. "We are dealing with a mind both calculated and bold. The spiral, the snow, the precision, all speak of purpose. But to what end?" He paced the alley, his gaze sweeping the surroundings. The warehouse's walls bore traces of soot, and a nearby drainpipe rattled in the wind. Holmes paused, examining a patch of snow near the pipe. "Curious," he muttered, scraping away the surface to reveal a faint smear of ash, barely discernible. "Not from the warehouse, too fine. A chemical residue, perhaps." I frowned. "From Vance's work as a chemist?" "Possibly," Holmes replied, pocketing a sample in a small vial. "Or from our killer's preparations. We shall test it at Baker Street." Lestrade, growing impatient, gestured to his men. "If you're done poking at snow, Holmes, I've a report to file. You'll let me know if you find anything?" Holmes nodded absently, his mind already elsewhere. "You shall have your answers, Lestrade, but first we must follow the snow." As the inspector departed, I turned to Holmes. "Where to next?" "Miss Vance mentioned a colleague of her brother's, the one with strange experiments." Holmes's eyes gleamed. "A promising lead, Watson, but first we return to 221B. The ash, the footprint, the spiral, they whisper of a pattern, and I mean to hear it clearly." We retraced our steps to the waiting cab, the snow falling thicker now, obscuring the alley's secrets. As we rode back through London's fog-choked streets, I felt the weight of the mystery settle upon me. The spiral, stark and silent, seemed to coil in my mind, a riddle as cold as the winter itself. Chapter 3. The Widow's Tale. The afternoon following our visit to the Cheapside crime scene found Sherlock Holmes and me in a hansom cab, rattling through London's snow-draped streets toward Bloomsbury. The air was thick with fog, the gas lamps mere halos in the gloom, and the clatter of hooves echoed like a metronome in the city's vast orchestra. Holmes, his eyes, fixed on some inner calculus, clutched the vial of ash we had recovered, his mind no doubt weaving threads from our scant clues. "Watson," he said abruptly, "Miss Vance mentioned her brother's colleague, but it is the second victim, Mr. Thomas Harrow, who now commands our attention. His widow, Mrs. Clara Harrow, may hold the key to this spiral's meaning." I nodded, recalling Lestrade's report. Harrow was a merchant stabbed like the others with the spiral in the snow. "Do you suspect a connection to Vance's chemistry work?" Holmes's lips curled in a faint smile. "Suspicion is a blunt tool, Watson. I seek facts. Mrs. Harrow's story will either illuminate or obscure. Either way, we shall learn something." Our cab halted before a modest townhouse, its windows draped in heavy velvet, a sign of mourning. A maid, her eyes red-rimmed, admitted us into a drawing room where the air was stifling with the scent of lilies and wax. Mrs. Clara Harrow awaited us, seated in a high-backed chair clad in widow's black. She was a woman of middle years, her face handsome but drawn, her hands clasped tightly about a silver locket. The room, lit by a single candelabrum, felt as though it held its breath. "Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson," she said, her voice low and measured. "I am grateful for your visit, though I fear I have little to offer. My husband's death is a wound too fresh to fathom." Holmes took the chair opposite, his gaze piercing yet courteous. "Madam, we seek only the truth. Tell us of Mr. Harrow's final days. Had he enemies or dealings that might explain his fate?" Mrs. Harrow's fingers tightened on the locket, and her eyes flickered to the fire. "Thomas was a merchant of textiles, respected in his trade. He had no enemies I knew of, though his business brought him into contact with many. He was..." anxious in the weeks before his death, speaking of debts and a man he called the alchemist. I leaned forward, my interest piqued. An alchemist? Did he elaborate? She shook her head, her expression guarded. Only that this man sought investors for some chemical venture. Thomas dismissed it as folly, but he met him twice, late at night near the docks. I begged him to avoid such company, but he was stubborn. Holmes's eyes narrowed. This alchemist, did your husband name him? No, she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. But he carried a card, which I found in his desk after his death. She rose and retrieved a small pasteboard from a drawer, handing it to Holmes. It bore no name, only a spiral symbol identical to those at the crime scenes etched in black ink. Holmes examined it, his fingers tracing the design. A curious calling card. Watson, note the paper's quality, expensive yet unadorned. A man of means and mystery. He turned to Mrs. Harrow. Did your husband mention this symbol? She hesitated, her gaze darting to the locket. Once. He said it was a mark of trust, but he seemed uneasy. I thought it mere superstition. I studied her closely, my physician's eye noting the slight tremor in her hands, the way her eyes avoided Holmes's. Her tale felt rehearsed, as though she measured each word. A red herring, perhaps designed to mislead. I glanced at Holmes, who gave an imperceptible nod, signaling he shared my suspicion. Mrs. Harrow, Holmes said, his tone gentle but firm, is there aught else you withhold? The smallest detail may save lives. Her lips parted, then closed, and she shook her head. I have told you all I know, Mr. Holmes. I wish only for justice. Holmes rose, pocketing the card. We shall trouble you no further, madam, but rest assured the truth will out. As we stepped into the snowy street, the fog seemed to thicken, swallowing the house behind us. I turned to Holmes, my breath clouding in the cold. She's hiding something, Holmes. Her manner, the locket, she knows more than she admits. Indeed, Watson, he replied, his eyes gleaming. Her story is a tapestry of half-truths. The alchemist is a convenient phantom, and that card a deliberate clue. Whether hers or another's, we shall see. But the locket... Did you observe how she clutched it when I pressed her? I frowned. A keepsake, perhaps, or a memento of her husband. Or a secret, Holmes said, hailing a cab. We return to Baker Street. I must analyze the ash in this card's ink. The spiral binds our victims, but Mrs. Harrow's reticence suggests a deeper game. As our cab rolled through the gaslit streets, the snow fell in silent curtains veiling London's secrets. The widow's tale had stirred the waters of our mystery, but whether it led to truth or deception, I could not yet discern. Holmes, however, seemed invigorated, his mind a crucible for the clues we had gathered. Chapter 4. Shadows in the Fog. The evening after our interview with Mrs. Clara Harrow found Sherlock Holmes in a state of restless vigor. At 221B Baker Street, the fire cast flickering shadows across his chemical apparatus, where he had spent hours analyzing the ash from Cheapside and the ink of the spiral-embossed card. The results, he declared, pointed to a dockside connection, traces of tar and a rare pigment used in shipyard paints. Watson, he said, his eyes alight, the alchemist Mrs. Harrow spoke of may be a fiction, but her tale leads us to the Thames. We must seek answers in the taverns of Wapping. I bundled into my greatcoat, my service revolver a reassuring weight in my pocket, and followed Holmes into the night. London was a city transformed by fog, its streets muffled under snow, the gas lamps mere smudges of light. Our hansom cab rattled toward the docks, the air growing heavy with the tang of river mud and coal smoke. The clatter of hooves and the distant wail of a foghorn lent an eerie rhythm to our journey. We alighted near the Prospect of Whitby, a tavern notorious for its rough clientele. The building loomed like a weathered sentinel, its windows aglow with lamplight. Inside, the air was thick with tobacco and the din of sailors' voices. Holmes, his deerstalker pulled low, scanned the room with predatory focus. I kept close, my hand near my revolver, for the docks were no place for the unwary. "There, Watson," Holmes murmured, nodding toward a corner where a man sat alone, his face shadowed by a slouch hat. His right leg was extended stiffly, and his gait, as he rose to order a drink, betrayed a pronounced limp, matching the footprint from Cheapside. My pulse quickened. Could this be the Snow Killer? Holmes's eyes gleamed. "Patience, Watson. We observe, then act." We took a table nearby, feigning casual conversation. The man, lean and weathered, sipped his ale with a wariness that spoke of secrets. His coat, I noted, was stained with dark smudges. Tar, perhaps, or the ash Holmes had analyzed. As the tavern's clock struck 10, the man abruptly rose, casting a glance about before slipping out a side door. Holmes was on his feet in an instant, and I followed, the cold biting my face as we emerged into a fog-soaked alley. The snow crunched underfoot, and the man's limping silhouette vanished into the mist. "After him, Watson," Holmes hissed, his voice taut with urgency. The chase led us through a maze of narrow passages, the fog so dense I could scarcely see Holmes ahead. Hansom cabs clattered unseen, their wheels a ghostly echo. The man's limp slowed him, but he knew the docks well, darting past crates and barrels with practiced ease. My lungs burned and my boots slipped on icy cobbles, but Holmes moved like a hound on the scent, his greatcoat flaring behind him. We cornered our quarry in a dead-end alley where the Thames lapped against a rotting pier. The man turned, his face gaunt under the gaslight, his eyes wide with fear. "Stay back," he rasped, brandishing a knife that glinted wickedly. "I ain't done nothin'." Holmes raised a hand, his voice calm but commanding. "We seek only answers, sir. Your limp matches a footprint at a murder scene. Explain yourself." The man's knife wavered and he sagged against a crate. "I ain't no killer," he muttered. "I was in Cheapside, sure, scavenging for scraps. Saw a gent fall, blood on the snow, and that spiral thing. I ran. Didn't want no trouble." I frowned, sensing a red herring. His fear seemed genuine, but his presence at the scene was too convenient. Holmes, however, pressed on. "This gent, who was he?" "Didn't see his face," the man said, his voice trembling. "But he dropped something. A glass vial, smelled sharp like almonds. I took it, thought it might fetch a penny." He fumbled in his coat and produced a small vial. Its contents long evaporated. Holmes seized it, his eyes narrowing. "Cyanide, Watson, or a derivative. The snow killer's poison, perhaps." He turned to the man. "Your name and where can we find you?" "Jem Carter, sir. I sleep at the Doss house in Shadwell." Carter's knife dropped and he fled into the fog before we could detain him. Holmes pocketed the vial, his expression thoughtful. "A witness, not a killer, but his tale confirms our chemical thread. This vial links the murders to a poisoner's craft." As we retraced our steps, the fog seemed to close in, the gas lamps fading to mere whispers of light. The chase had yielded a clue, but Carter's story raised more questions. Was he truly a bystander or a pawn in the snow killer's game? The vial, with its bitter almond scent, weighed heavily in my thoughts, a silent promise of revelations to come. Chapter 5. The Alchemist's Secret. The fog of the previous night's chase lingered in my mind as Sherlock Holmes and I sat in our Baker Street lodgings the following morning, the fire casting a warm glow against the chill of December 1888. Holmes, his eyes bright with purpose, examined the vial Jem Carter had surrendered, its faint almond scent a silent accusation. "Cyanide, Watson," he declared, "or a close cousin. This is no common poison, but the work of a skilled chemist. Our next step lies in tracing its source." He had cross-referenced the spiral card from Mrs. Harrow with local chemical suppliers, pinpointing a shop in Whitechapel known for discreet transactions. The alchemist Mrs. Harrow mentioned may be a fiction, Holmes said, donning his greatcoat. But the vial suggests a real craftsman. To Whitechapel, Watson, where the snow may yet yield answers. We ventured into London's East End, where the fog clung like a shroud and gas lamps flickered through the haze. The streets teemed with costermongers and dock workers, their voices muffled by the snow that blanketed the cobbles. Our destination was a narrow shop front, its sign reading Grimshaw's Chemical Emporium, its windows obscured by grime. The bell jangled as we entered, and a wizened proprietor, his apron stained with unknown compounds, greeted us with wary eyes. "Mr. Grimshaw," Holmes said, his tone smooth. "We seek information on a customer purchasing cyanide or its derivatives. A man, perhaps, with a limp or an interest in alchemical symbols." Grimshaw's face tightened, and he busied himself with a ledger. "I deal in many chemicals, sir, and ask no questions of my patrons. Cyanide's common enough for pest control. Can't say I recall such a man." Holmes's eyes narrowed, catching the man's unease. "A spiral symbol, then, etched on a card or mentioned in passing. Surely that would stand out." Grimshaw hesitated, then gestured to a back room. "There's something you might see. Follow me, but mind your step." We trailed him through a curtain into a cluttered storeroom where crates of vials and jars gleamed in the dim light of a single lamp. Grimshaw pointed to a trapdoor in the floor, its edges worn from use. "Found. This after I bought the shop. Ain't mine, but it's been used recent-like. I don't pry, but you're welcome to look." Holmes knelt, examining the trapdoor's hinges, which bore fresh scratches. "Recently opened, Watson. Our alchemist is careless." He lifted the hatch, revealing a ladder descending into darkness. I gripped my revolver, my heart quickening as we followed Holmes into the unknown. The ladder led to a basement laboratory, a cavern of alchemical wonders. Burners hissed beneath bubbling flasks, and shelves groaned under the weight of arcane texts and glassware. The air was sharp with chemical fumes, and a faint glow emanated from a residue on a workbench. Holmes, his magnifying glass in hand, studied it closely. "Potassium cyanide, Watson, refined to a lethal purity. This is our killer's workshop." I surveyed the room, my physician's eye noting the precision of the equipment. "This is no amateur's den, Holmes. Whoever works here has training, perhaps medical or scientific." Holmes nodded, sifting through papers on a desk. He uncovered a ledger, its pages listing names: Edward Vance, Thomas Harrow, Charles Drayton. "Our victims," he murmured. "Linked by this place, but why?" A folded note slipped from the ledger, bearing the spiral symbol in a single word: retribution. "Retribution," I echoed, a chill creeping up my spine. "A vendetta, then, against these men, but for what?" Holmes's gaze was distant, his mind racing. "The spiral is a signature, Watson, but the motive eludes us. This laboratory is a treasure trove, yet it feels staged. A red herring, perhaps, to distract from the true killer." He pocketed the note and examined a vial identical to Carter's, its almond scent unmistakable. "The poison is real, but the ledger's prominence suggests a trap." As if in answer, a creak echoed from above, and the trapdoor slammed shut. Footsteps retreated, and the faint clink of a lock sealed our fate. I rushed to the ladder, pounding on the hatch, but it held fast. "Holmes, we're trapped!" Holmes remained calm, his eyes scanning the room. "Grimshaw or another seeks to delay us, but every trap reveals its maker." He located a ventilation grate, its screws loose, and set to work with a pocket knife. "Assist me, Watson, we shall not be caged long." With effort, we pried the grate free and crawled through a narrow shaft, emerging in an alley behind the shop. The snow fell thickly, obscuring Grimshaw's tracks, but Holmes's resolve was unshaken. "The laboratory confirms our chemical thread," he said, brushing snow from his coat. "But the locked trapdoor suggests a mind anticipating our moves. We return to Baker Street to analyze this note and regroup." As we hailed a cab, the fog seemed to pulse with secrets, the spiral's coiled menace ever present in my thoughts. The laboratory had unveiled a piece of the snow killer's puzzle, but its staged nature hinted at a deeper deception. Holmes, I knew, would unravel it, but the path ahead felt as treacherous as the icy streets beneath our feet. Chapter 6. The False Confession. The morning after our escape from the Whitechapel laboratory dawned bleak, with London's snow-laden streets shrouded in a fog that seemed to mirror the mystery's opacity. At 221B Baker Street, Sherlock Holmes sat by the fire, the spiral-embossed note from the laboratory spread before him. The word retribution stared back, a silent challenge. His analysis of the note's ink had confirmed its link to the chemical shop, but the staged ledger and locked trapdoor gnawed at him. "A mind anticipates us, Watson," he mused, "and we must outpace it." Our reverie was interrupted by a telegram from Inspector Lestrade summoning us to Scotland Yard. "A suspect in custody," it read, "confessing to the snow killer murders. Your presence requested." Holmes's eyes gleamed with skepticism. "A confession so soon? Convenient, perhaps too convenient. Come, Watson, let us test this gift." We arrived at Scotland Yard, a fortress of brick and bustle where constables hurried through corridors lit by flickering gaslight. Lestrade met us in a cramped interrogation room, its air heavy with the scent of damp wool and ink. A man sat chained to a table, his head bowed, his clothes tattered. It was Jem Carter, the limping dock worker we had chased in Wapping, his face pale and haggard. "Holmes," Lestrade said, his tone triumphant. "Carter turned himself in at dawn claiming he's your snow killer. Says he stabbed Vance, Harrow, and Drayton and carved those spirals. We've got him cold." Holmes took a seat opposite Carter, his gaze piercing. "Mr. Carter," he said, his voice calm but unyielding, "enlighten us. Why did you kill these men?" Carter's hands trembled, his eyes darting to Lestrade before settling on Holmes. I did it, sir. Stabbed him in the snow like you said. The spiral was my mark to scare folks. I hated 'em, Vance, Harrow, Drayton, for cheating me in deals down at the docks." I frowned, my physician's instincts alert. Carter's voice lacked conviction, his words rehearsed, and his frame shook with more than cold. "Cheating you?" I asked. "What dealings did you have with a chemist, a merchant, and a banker?" Carter faltered, wiping sweat from his brow. "They owed me money from shipping jobs. I don't recall details, but I killed 'em, I swear." Holmes leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Describe the spiral, Mr. Carter, its size, its depth, the tool you used." Carter swallowed, his fingers twitching. "It was big, maybe a foot wide. Carved it with my knife deep in the snow. Took me a minute each time." Holmes's lips curled in a faint smile. "A foot wide, you say? And you stabbed each man without struggle in busy streets unseen? Tell me, what poison did you use?" Carter's eyes widened, panic flickering. "Poison? No poison, just the knife. I don't know nothing about poisons." Lestrade shifted uncomfortably, but Holmes pressed on. "The vial you gave us, smelling of almonds? Cyanide, Mr. Carter. How did it come to you?" Carter's voice cracked. "Found it like I said. I ain't no chemist. Please, I done the murders. Just lock me up." Holmes rose, his expression one of quiet disdain. "Lestrade, this man is no killer but a puppet. His confession is a patchwork of lies fed to him by another. The spiral at the scenes was 6 inches, not a foot, and carved with precision, not a clumsy knife. The murders required chemical knowledge he lacks. Someone coerced him, likely with threats or coin. Lestrade bristled. Coerced? He came to us, Holmes. You're saying he's covering for the real killer? Precisely, Holmes replied, glancing at Carter, who shrank under his gaze. Mr. Carter, who paid you to confess? Speak, and you may yet save yourself. Carter's lips trembled, but he shook his head. No one, sir. It's all me. I swear it. Holmes turned to Lestrade. Detain him, but not as the killer. He is a witness or a pawn. Search his lodgings in Shadwell for evidence of payment or threats. The true snow killer watches us, and this confession is a diversion. As we left the room, I felt a chill unrelated to the snow outside. Carter's fear was palpable, but his story was a red herring, designed to stall our pursuit. Holmes, I said as we stepped into the fog-bound street, if Carter's a pawn, the killer is bold to manipulate Scotland Yard itself. Holmes nodded, his eyes scanning the horizon. Bold and cunning. The laboratory, the note, now this confession, all are threads in a tapestry of misdirection. But the cyanide vial remains our anchor. We must trace its origin beyond Grimshaw's shop. Our cab rattled through London's gaslit maze, the snow falling in silent veils. The false confession had deepened the mystery, suggesting a killer not only lethal but theatrical, orchestrating moves like a chess master. Holmes, I knew, relished such a foe, but the weight of the spiral's menace pressed upon me. As the fog swallowed the city, I wondered what further shadows awaited us. Chapter 7. The Snowbound Manor. The day following Jem Carter's false confession found Sherlock Holmes in a fever of deduction at 221B Baker Street. The fire crackled, casting light on the spiral-embossed note and the cyanide vial, which lay like relics of our mystery. Holmes's analysis of Carter's lodgings, relayed by Lestrade, had uncovered a cryptic letter. Confess, or the spiral claims you. The handwriting matched the anonymous threat to Miss Eleanor Vance, linking the killer's manipulations. A second clue, a torn map fragment found among Carter's effects, pointed to a manor outside London owned by a reclusive scholar, Dr. Mortimer Grange. Grange, Holmes mused, pinning the map to his board. A name whispered in alchemical circles. The laboratory, the cyanide, the spiral, all converge on this manor. Watson, we must brave the storm. I glanced at the window where snow fell in relentless sheets, the wind howling like a banshee. A perilous journey, Holmes, but if Grange holds answers, I'm with you. We set out in a hired carriage, the road to Hampstead a treacherous ribbon of ice. The gas lamps of London faded, replaced by the eerie glow of snow under a moonless sky. The manor, when we reached it, was a Gothic sentinel, its turrets clawing at the storm. Its windows were dark, save for a faint flicker in an upper room, and the grounds were a frozen wilderness, the snow piling against crumbling stone walls. Holmes, his greatcoat dusted with flakes, examined the gate. Fresh tracks, Watson, partially obscured. Someone has been here recently. His voice was low, his eyes scanning the shadows. We forced the rusted gate and approached the entrance, a heavy oak door that groaned under Holmes's touch. Inside, the air was cold and musty, the hall lined with portraits whose eyes seemed to follow us. A chandelier draped in cobwebs swayed faintly, though no breeze stirred. My hand rested on my revolver, the silence oppressive. Holmes, I whispered, this place feels like a tomb. A tomb with secrets, he replied, his gaze fixed on a staircase spiraling upward. The light we saw. Our path lies there. We ascended, the boards creaking beneath our boots, and entered a study where a single candle burned. Books on alchemy and chemistry lined the walls, and a desk bore papers scattered as if in haste. Holmes pounced on them, uncovering a journal detailing a failed alchemical society. Names leaped out. Vance, Harrow, Drayton, and Grange himself. Our victims, Holmes said, bound by a shared past, a betrayal perhaps that birthed retribution. I scanned the journal, noting references to a spiral elixir, a cyanide-based compound. The murder weapon, Holmes. Grange is our killer. Holmes's eyes narrowed. Too neat, Watson. The journal is a beacon left for us to find. A red herring or a trap. His words were cut short by a metallic click from the hall. I spun, revolver drawn as shadows moved beyond the door. 3 men armed with cudgels emerged, their faces masked by scarves. "You've meddled enough, Holmes," one growled, his voice muffled but venomous. Holmes, ever prepared, had anticipated treachery. "Watson, the window!" he shouted, seizing a chair and hurling it at our attackers. I fired a warning shot, the report echoing as we scrambled to a frosted pane. Holmes smashed it with his cane, and we leaped into the snow below, landing heavily but unharmed. The men pursued, their shouts swallowed by the storm. We fled across the manor's grounds, the snow blinding, the wind a relentless foe. Holmes, with his uncanny sense of direction, led us to a copse where we took cover, the attackers' lanterns fading into the blizzard. "A trap, as I suspected," Holmes panted, his breath clouding. "Grange, or his agent, expected us." I clutched my revolver, my heart pounding. "But the journal, Holmes, it names the victims, it's proof." "Proof planted to mislead," he replied, brushing snow from his coat. "The true killer uses Grange's name as a shield. We must return to London and trace the letter's author. The spiral's master is cunning but not infallible." We trudged through the storm, finding our carriage mercifully intact, and set off for Baker Street. The manor receded into the night, its secrets half revealed, its dangers all too real. The journal's revelations, though compelling, felt like a siren's call, luring us from the true path. Holmes, I knew, would unravel the deception, but the snow killer's boldness chilled me as much as the winter wind. Chapter 8. The Hidden Motive. The storm that had pursued us from Dr. Mortimer Grange's manor lingered into the following day, cloaking London in a mantle of snow and shadow. At 221B Baker Street, the fire roared, its warmth a stark contrast to the chill of our recent peril. Sherlock Holmes paced before a cluttered table strewn with the journal from the manor, the spiral-embossed note, and the cyanide vial. His eyes, sharp as a blade, darted between these relics, his mind weaving a tapestry from the threads of our investigation. "Watson," he said, pausing to light his pipe, "the manor was a stage, its journal a script to mislead. Yet it holds truth amidst the lies. The names, Vance, Harrow, Drayton, and Grange, point to a shared history, a betrayal that festers like a wound. We must unravel it." I settled into my armchair, the journal's cryptic references to a spiral elixir and an alchemical society fresh in my mind. The word retribution on the note suggests revenge, Holmes. But for what? And why now, years later? Holmes's lips curled in a faint smile. "An excellent question, Watson. The answer lies in the past." He spread a map of London across the table, pinning markers at the murder sites: Cheapside, Whitechapel, and the City. The locations form no pattern, but the victims do. Each was a member of an alchemical society disbanded in disgrace 20 years ago. Grange, I suspect, was its architect. He produced a yellowed newspaper clipping retrieved from his archives detailing a scandal in 1868. The article described a group of scholars led by Dr. Mortimer Grange who sought to transmute base metals into gold through a chemical elixir. Their experiments failed, bankrupting investors and ruining Grange's reputation. Among the society's members were Edward Vance's mentor, Thomas Harrow's father, and Charles Drayton's uncle, proxies for our victims who inherited their forebears' roles. The betrayal, Holmes continued, came when the society's members accused Grange of fraud, abandoning him to public scorn. Vance, Harrow, and Drayton, as heirs to their legacies, became targets of a vendetta. The spiral, an alchemical symbol of transformation, is Grange's mark of retribution. I leaned forward, the pieces aligning. So Grange is the snow killer, avenging his disgrace? Holmes's eyes narrowed. So it appears, yet the trap at the manor suggests a mind beyond Grange's. His reclusive nature, noted in records, contrasts with the killer's boldness. The journal's prominence was a red herring, meant to point us to Grange while shielding the true orchestrator. Perhaps a disciple or a survivor of that society. I frowned, recalling Mrs. Harrow's guarded demeanor and Jem Carter's coerced confession. Could Mrs. Harrow be involved? Her story of the alchemist felt rehearsed. Holmes nodded, tapping the map. A possibility, Watson. Her locket may hold a clue, perhaps a relic of the society. But Miss Vance troubles me more. Her distress is genuine, yet her brother's death drew us into this web. Is she a pawn or a player? He resumed pacing, the firelight casting his shadow across the room. The cyanide, the spirals, the staged clues all suggest a killer who revels in theatrics. Grange's motive fits, but the execution feels borrowed, as if another hand guides the blade. I considered the evidence. The laboratory's staged ledger, Carter's false confession, the manor's trap. Each was a misdirection, yet the cyanide vial and spiral remained constants. Holmes, I said, if Grange isn't the killer, who benefits from his disgrace being avenged? Holmes paused, his pipe trailing smoke. A question that cuts to the heart, Watson. The Alchemical Society had investors. Wealthy men who lost fortunes. One may have survived nursing a grudge not against Grange, but against those who exposed him. We must trace the Society's financial records. He rifled through a stack of papers, producing a list of investors from the 1868 scandal. One name stood out. Sir Henry Caldwell, a financier who vanished after the Society's collapse. Caldwell, Holmes murmured. Or his heir may be our shadow. The killer uses Grange's name to mask their own vendetta. The clock struck midnight, its chimes a solemn reminder of time's passage. Holmes's deductions had illuminated a motive, revenge for a decades-old betrayal. But the killer's identity remained elusive. The spiral, with its coiled menace, seemed to tighten around us, each clue a step closer to a confrontation I both dreaded and anticipated. Tomorrow, Holmes said, settling into his chair, we pursue Caldwell's trail. Lestrade must search for his descendants, and we shall revisit Miss Vance. The snow killer believes us misled, but their arrogance will be their undoing. As I retired to my room, the snow fell silently outside, blanketing London in a deceptive calm. The hidden motive now glimpsed cast a long shadow, and I wondered what further deceptions awaited. Holmes, I knew, would face them with his unyielding logic, but the human cost of such vengeance weighed heavily on my heart. Chapter 9. The Final Pursuit. The revelation of a decades-old vendetta, rooted in the Alchemical Society's betrayal, had set Sherlock Holmes ablaze with purpose. At 221B Baker Street, as the snowstorm raged into the evening of December 1888, Holmes pieced together the final clues. Lestrade's inquiries had uncovered a lead. Sir Henry Caldwell, the financier ruined by the Society, had a son, Arthur Caldwell, now living in obscurity near London's outskirts. The spiral embossed note, the cyanide, and the staged traps all pointed to him, masquerading as Dr. Mortimer Grange's avenger. Watson, Holmes said, his greatcoat already donned, Caldwell is our snow killer. He uses Grange's name to mask his own revenge against those who destroyed his father. We must find him before he strikes again. Miss Vance is his next target. I grabbed my revolver, my pulse quickening. Where, Holmes? The storm is blinding. "A derelict mill near the Lee River," he replied, citing a location from Caldwell's recent movements. "He lures us there, believing his traps have dulled our wits. Come, we have no time to lose." We braved the blizzard in a hired carriage, the wind howling like a chorus of specters. London's gas lamps vanished, replaced by the endless white of the storm. The mill, when we reached it, was a skeletal ruin, its timbers groaning under the snow's weight. The river, half frozen, churned nearby, its ice cracking ominously. A faint light flickered within the mill, a beacon in the chaos. Holmes, his deerstalker dusted with snow, scanned the ground. "Tracks, Watson, fresh despite the storm. Caldwell is here." His voice was steady, but his eyes burned with the hunter's zeal. We entered the mill, the air sharp with damp and decay. Shadows danced across rusted machinery, and the creak of floorboards betrayed movement above. My revolver in hand, I followed Holmes up a rickety staircase, the storm's roar muffled by the walls. At the top, in a loft lit by a single lantern, stood a man, tall, gaunt, his face etched with bitterness. Arthur Caldwell, his coat stained with chemical residue, held a knife, its blade glinting. Beside him, bound and gagged, was Miss Eleanor Vance, her eyes wide with terror. "Holmes," Caldwell sneered, his voice raw with hatred, "you're too late. The spiral claims its due. These traitors' heirs, Vance, Harrow, Drayton, ruined my father. Now their blood redeems him." Holmes stepped forward, his hands raised, but his gaze unyielding. "Your father's ruin was his own, Caldwell. Vengeance has consumed you as it did him. Release Miss Vance and face justice." Caldwell laughed, a hollow sound. "Justice? The society betrayed us, and Grange, their puppet, took the blame. I carved the spiral to honor, his vision to finish his work." He gestured to a table where vials of cyanide gleamed, their almond scent sharp in the air. I edged closer, my revolver trained on him. "You coerced Jem Carter, staged the laboratory, the manor, all to mislead us," I said, buying time. Caldwell's eyes flickered, a red herring unraveling. "Pawns, all of them, but you, Holmes, were the challenge. Now you'll watch her die." He raised the knife toward Miss Vance, but Holmes was faster. With a flick of his cane, Holmes struck Caldwell's wrist, sending the knife clattering. I lunged, freeing Miss Vance as Holmes grappled with Caldwell. The man fought with desperate strength, his hatred a palpable force. They stumbled toward the loft's edge, where a broken rail overlooked the frozen river below. Snow swirled through a shattered window, blinding us. "Watson!" Holmes shouted, pinning Caldwell. I rushed to his side, and together we subdued the killer, binding his wrists with a rope from my coat. Miss Vance, trembling but unharmed, clung to me, her gag removed. Caldwell, defeated, spat defiance. "The spiral lives, Holmes. You cannot erase it." Holmes's voice was cold. "Your spiral is a cipher of failure, Caldwell. Your father's greed, your vengeance, both are dust." As we escorted Caldwell down the stairs, Lestrade's men arrived, their lanterns piercing the storm. They had followed our trail, alerted by Holmes's earlier message. Caldwell was taken into custody, his confession spilling forth. The murders, the cyanide, the spirals, all orchestrated to avenge a father he barely knew, fueled by Grange's journals which he had stolen years ago. We returned Miss Vance to safety, her gratitude tempered by grief for her brother. The mill receded into the blizzard, its secrets laid bare. As our carriage rattled back to London, the snow seemed less menacing, the gas lamps a promise of warmth. Yet Caldwell's words lingered, a reminder of vengeance's cost. Holmes, silent, gazed into the storm. The mind that plots revenge, Watson, rarely sees its own ruin. Caldwell was his own victim. I nodded, the spiral's coiled menace fading from my thoughts. The snow killer was unmasked, but the human toll weighed heavily. Justice, I reflected, was a cold comfort in such a winter. Chapter 10. The Deduction. The storm that had cloaked our pursuit of Arthur Caldwell had abated, leaving London under a quiet blanket of snow as December 1888 drew to a close. At 221B Baker Street, the fire crackled with inviting warmth, its glow casting soft shadows across the familiar clutter of Sherlock Holmes's quarters. The violin lay silent, and the air held a stillness that followed the tempest of our recent ordeal. Holmes, seated in his armchair, his pipe sending tendrils of smoke ceilingward, exuded a calm satisfaction, the mark of a puzzle solved. Miss Eleanor Vance, now safe but still pale from her ordeal, sat opposite, her hands clasped around a teacup. I, beside her, felt the weight of the case lift, though its echoes lingered. The snow killer was in custody, yet the how and why demanded Holmes's final reckoning. "Mr. Holmes," Miss Vance said, her voice steady but soft, "I owe you my life, but I must understand. Why did Arthur Caldwell target my brother and nearly me?" Holmes leaned forward, his gray eyes gleaming. "Madam, allow me to unravel the threads of this affair from the spiral's first coil to its final undoing. Watson, pray take notes, for this is a case worth recording." I opened my notebook, the fire's warmth a comfort, as Holmes began. "The murders of Edward Vance, Thomas Harrow, and Charles Drayton," he said, "were not random, but the culmination of a vendetta rooted in 1868. An alchemical society led by Dr. Mortimer Grange sought to transmute base metals into gold through a chemical elixir, a spiral elixir named for its symbolic purity. The society's failure bankrupted its investors, including Sir Henry Caldwell, Arthur's father. When the members, ancestors, or mentors of our victims accused Grange of fraud, Sir Henry was ruined, his reputation and fortune lost. Arthur, then a boy, inherited his father's bitterness." He paused, gesturing to a chalkboard I had not noticed, where the spiral symbol was drawn, linked to names. Vance, Harrow, Drayton, Grange, Caldwell. "Arthur Caldwell," Holmes continued, "discovered Grange's journals years later, stolen from the manor. They detailed the society's betrayal, fueling his obsession. He adopted the spiral as his mark, a twisted homage to Grange, and used cyanide, refined in the Whitechapel laboratory, to kill those he blamed. Your brother, Miss Vance, for his mentor's role, Harrow for his father's, Drayton for his uncle's." Miss Vance's eyes widened. "But why the spirals in the snow?" "A signature," Holmes replied, "both theatrical and deliberate. The snow was his canvas, the spiral a symbol of transformation, his victims' deaths as retribution for the society's sins. The precision of the carvings, made with a modified cane, betrayed his chemical training, likely gained in obscurity after his father's fall." I interjected, recalling our clues. "The laboratory, the false confession, the manor's trap, all were misdirections?" Holmes nodded. "Caldwell was a master of deception. The laboratory's ledger naming the victims was staged to point us to Grange. Jem Carter's confession, coerced with threats, was a delay tactic. The manor's journal, left prominently, was a red herring to cement Grange's guilt. Even Mrs. Harrow's tale of an alchemist was seeded by Caldwell, who sent her the spiral card to confuse us. Her locket, I suspect, held a photograph of her husband's father, a society member, explaining her reticence." Miss Vance frowned. "But why involve me? The letter threatening my life, what purpose did it serve?" Holmes's expression softened. "You, madam, were both bait and catalyst. Caldwell knew of my methods through London's underbelly. By threatening you, he drew me into the case, believing he could outwit me. Your brother's death was his opening move, your fear his lure. Yet he underestimated us, Watson's courage, Lestrade's persistence, and my resolve. I felt a flush of pride, though the case's toll tempered it. "The cyanide vial from Carter," I said, And the manor's tracks, those were your anchors, Holmes. Indeed, he replied, tapping the chalkboard. The vial's almond scent confirmed cyanide, linking the murders to the laboratory. The manor's tracks, fresh despite the storm, betrayed Caldwell's presence, not Grange's. His final mistake was confronting us at the mill, where his hatred overpowered his cunning. Miss Vance set down her cup, her eyes brimming. Thank you, Mr. Holmes, Dr. Watson. My brother's killer is caught, but the pain remains. Holmes's voice was gentle. Justice, madam, is a cold bomb, but it is ours to give. Caldwell's vengeance consumed him as it does all who seek it blindly. I closed my notebook, reflecting on the spiral's cost. There's a lesson here, Holmes, I said. Vengeance begets only ruin for the avenger and his victims alike. Holmes smiled, a rare warmth in his eyes. Well said, Watson. The mind that plots revenge rarely accounts for its own unraveling. Let us hope London rests easier tonight. As Miss Vance departed, promising to write, I gazed at the snow beyond our window, its purity a contrast to the case's darkness. The fire's glow, the clink of teacups, the quiet of Baker Street, these were my anchors, grounding me after the storm.